It always comes to leadership,
Mm-hmm.
so where's the leadership? It always comes to relationships because, if you go to Yale, Harvard, who's on that board? It's a relationship. It might be somebody from Goldman Sachs who knows a good friend at JP Morgan Chase, and they both went and they're in the same class, so they come on the same board. They write big checks.
All right, Jim, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So,
this.
Yeah. So before we get into the meat of all of this, we've started a new theme since we are about driving productive human connection by anchoring humanity in compassionate conversation. We like to go back to your tip for navigating difficult conversations, which was be diplomatic, but be honest. What does that look like for you?
Well, I think, if you go back over my career, and I think the career of many people who deem successful, you can't have an immediate reaction to something that deep down is not correct. It's wrong. And you can blow it. You can blow it with your reaction. So the main thing you want to do is to be able to not agree, but diplomatically tell them there's a difference of opinion and share that in a way that they would listen, as opposed to being turned off in the first 5 minutes if you reacted in a very negative, very spontaneous, and a very almost challenging way. So that's what I've learned. So it's not something I could tell you I did it when I was in my 20s. But over time, when I had larger goals to shoot for in terms of affecting change and being a leader and all like that, and being successful, I had to develop that skill.
How did you figure that out, or did you learn it? It was taught to you?
Well, I think for most of the young people on this Zoom, they should realize you're going to all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. The key is, do you learn from your mistakes? And it's nothing worse than having people keep making the same mistakes over and over, not being able to look inside and accept the fact that maybe they're not successful, but what they did, not what people did to them. And so when you start doing that, and you start developing, and you have that, and I think the highest compliment I've ever received is from my daughter, who said, "Daddy, you're probably the most introspective elder that I know." And I still do it. I mean, I still look inside and say, how could I have handled that situation differently? But when you make mistakes and get punished by your mistakes, that should have an impact on what you do and how you do it in the future.
And I think I think that's a skill that I have. And one of the things for me is being able to see, like, if it was me in that position, I wouldn't want to be taken to task in a way that made me feel some kind of way or made me feel shame. So it kind of helps me, in most cases, direct how I respond. But I love that. I love that tip.
Yeah, I wanted to follow one other thing that you said in that answer that I think is key is when you do respond in a way that that's going to have the other person help understand what you're saying without taking offense or getting angry.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that? Because you talk to 1,000 different people and they might all have a different way of receiving that information, right?
You know what the key is? The diplomatic preface. Before you answer, you preface it in a way that allows the conversation and communication to occur. Example would be, I might be wrong on this, but. Okay. I say,
introducing some doubt, not shutting the door on future conversation.
So you facilitate that with your intro, which you don't want to say disarm the other person, but you want to say, I'm going to communicate in a way that I'm going to hear you and you're going to hear me. So that's why I call it the glorified preface.
I love the the thing I love about it, and this is something that we talk about in our consulting practice and other things, like you can only control your own approach. You can only control your own actions. You can only control your own response. Like you can't force the other person not to take offense. You can't force them not to say something offensive, but you can certainly maintain connection if you can control the productivity of it. And you can still be right, and you can find your way to right without doing it in a modern 2021 way of doing things, social media way of doing things, I guess we could call
it. As we get into a little bit more of the meat, you did say one thing in there I just wanted to ask. You said people who are deemed successful. How do you look at success? How do you characterize success?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I always say that the individual, has to define success from their perspective. And I don't know if you guys have ever read a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And Napoleon Hill says, at 55, look back on your life and say, what goals did you achieve? And I did that when I was in my 30s. And I came back and I read what I put. I was in Africa when I wrote it. And I achieved all my goals, And so, but these are my goals. These are my goals. It wasn't, I didn't want to be on the cover of Jet, but I wanted to be a change agent in this field of minority business, and I did it. So it's for the person to do that. And with even young people, when I do a lot of personal coaching, I say the same thing to them. I said, look where you want to be, with whom do you want to work? What do you feel satisfied with in terms of your net worth? What do you want to do in terms of helping other people or helping your community or helping your race? And once you define what's important to you, a long-winded way of saying you've defined your success. So if you keep chasing after what other people are going to do and how they define you, you're going to have a hard time. You might be chasing your tail for the next 30 or 40 years.
I think it's fair to say you will be chasing, because there's always somebody ahead of you.
Absolutely.
The way there's a lot of different areas of your life that weigh into this. It's not just feeling joy. It's not just your personal finances. It's not just your professional success or your family. It's all of those things, culmination of all those things. And I think in my life, when I've been out of balance, it has been like I'm over prioritizing on making money, and then everything else is just shit. Right. So I love that answer. Can we talk about relationship with money and expecting good things? You actually somewhat touch on this on the very first page of the book, and talking about your parents' jobs and your position in the neighborhood because of that. And so I'm guessing that has a lot to do with you being able to, and I'm presuming and being presumptuous here that you have a good relationship with money. But like, how did you form this relationship with money and form this relationship with success, accepting success, expecting success? Like, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah.
But there are about 2 or 3 questions there, Rodney. Okay, I'll try and dissect each one of them. Right.
Called out. I love it.
Yeah, I did it. I did the multi-question.
Yeah.
All right, that's all right. I'm still old enough, but I can still pick that stuff up. Maybe 3 or 4 years I won't be able to do this. But say we're hot now. Okay, I can do it.
We got it documented. We know you can.
Okay. So I would say the first thing is, which is very important, is to say, what do you think about wealth? And, you define, once again, your own definition of wealth, and what wealth is, what you can touch it, what you want to do with wealth, how do you want to invest, how do you want to, take wealth and use it for other things, and what brings you inner satisfaction that you've achieved your goal in terms of accumulation of capital and wealth. So these are all kind of personal decisions, once again, but I think for me, to start off, to answer your first part of the question, is when I saw going to a very exclusive private school in Chicago in the 50s, This is in the 50s, not the 60s and 70s. This is in the 50s. And saw who are the people who are wealthy, how they made their wealth, and, what they did with their wealth. It just made me think about wealth in a different way. So if you took the 50s,
what were the demographics of that school?
That's a very good question, because in Chicago, there are 3 exclusive private schools. There's one, the University of Chicago, which is very based on University of Chicago. Many of those kids and students were kids of professors at the University of Chicago. Very exclusive. John Rogers went to, I can name other people. Arnie Duncan, who was the Secretary of Education, went to that school. Then on the north side, they had 2 schools. One was Latin, and there's a Boston Latin, there's a Chicago Latin, which is very exclusive, WASP private school. So when I was going to my school, there were token Jews at that school. Token. I mean, the very wealthiest Jews got into that. But we're talking about token Jews. And then there was this other school called Francis Parker, which was built on being progressive. And they went out of their way initially to have a disproportionate, and it's in the book, a disproportionate number of people of color on scholarship going to this school. And it was predominantly, the leadership of the school was Jewish. So there was a Jewish, progressive mindset and mission, and it was supposed to be embryonic democracy. I never even knew what the word meant at the time. It was a big mission statement, I think. And so that's what it was. And so I got exposed to that at a very early age. And so not that I was going to be, and I never have been, a person that just worships capital or worships to accumulate as much money. I always want to accumulate enough capital so my family would be secure. And it gets back to what you said earlier, Rodney, so that my daughter, or I was hoping it could be more, would be able to inherit to buy that $1.3 million house in LA. Be like all the other kids that went to that school. So that was always my goal, to have enough money. So if she wanted to buy a house or whatever, or she didn't want to do anything but be an artist, if she just wanted to be a singer, she had that freedom to be able to do that. And I felt that that was my obligation in terms of creating wealth. So I had my own personal goals, what I was going to do with wealth, but it was never something every day I got up and I got to make more money. I got to make more money.
This brings me back to this question that I wanted to ask about your book, which you very much focus on the economic and wealth development in minority communities to gain essentially social and political power, right? Yeah. And that's how equity happens. Yeah. And there's a stat that you call out specifically over the last 30 years where white wealth has gone from $100,000 to $140,000 per family. Hispanic wealth has gone up. Asian wealth has gone up. But Black wealth has gone from 14,000 to 11,000.
Yes.
And you give a lot of great insights for the varying Black and brown communities across this country to gain that wealth. And there is one theme that intersperses a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. That's collaboration, that's partnership, both globally and locally.
Yes.
Why do you think, and if you don't have an analytical answer on this and his personal opinion, we totally accept it because your opinion matters. Why do you see that being a challenge right now? And you didn't fall prey to it. You kept going.
Yeah.
So I'm asking the 2-part question is really your personal experience on that and why you think it's a macro problem. Why do you think that is an issue today?
I'll answer very, very candidly. And there are now books being written on this. My friend Sean Rochester wrote a book called Black Tax. When he did the University of Chicago MBA, he did deep research on how much money, because of discrimination and racism, was never going into the Black community. This is not a new phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that is 400 years. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a 400 years phenomenon, how Black people were used to create wealth for white people. And you guys know, because you're very smart, you know the power of cotton in terms of the growth of this nation. And it was cotton, not capital, but it was bodies that people were using on the stock that created the New York Stock Exchange. It was the bodies that how many slaves did they have in the South to produce cotton? And once cotton got the cotton gin, how cotton became the number one export around the world. But it was based on the backs of Black people and the backs of slaves. And even after slavery was abolished, there were the same Black people in the fields doing the same thing. And they had all kinds of laws to make sure they were there picking the cotton so that you could have a Wall Street, that you could have the whole New England manufacturing production that created America. So this is a 400-year thing.
My dad and I were actually talking about this. We were talking about video editing, and then we got into talking about the Emancipation Proclamation and the reason that Lincoln did what he did, and it wasn't the altruistic means that we all thought. I mean, there's letters where he talks about it. This was shutting down the unstoppable economic engine of the South.
Yes.
And redistributing it to the rest of the country
in
a very methodical way.
Right. So when you really put it in those terms, you got to answer your second question. Okay. Why is it important? Now, I don't know if you guys saw the 2-part, documentary on the Black church that was on public broadcast. You really ought to do it.
I didn't.
Okay.
And it's deep because my good buddy John Legend was executive producer of that. So it's deep. And Skip Gates it's Skip Gates. So when you start thinking about the South, and you had all these people every day going into the cotton fields and being, punished and beaten and tried, it's just terrible. It's a terrible thing even coming across. And then you see how important those bodies were in creating wealth. The only thing that kept the people going was the church. So they would allow the preachers. Okay, I'm going somewhere with this. They allow the preachers
we're following
to be the leaders to give these people who were just everyday suffering unbelievably, to at least get them enough spirit and hope in life after death so they could perform while they were here to create wealth. So then who became our leaders? The preachers. So now you go forward to the Civil Rights Committee. Who were our leaders? The preachers. Hooks.
Reverend Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King was a preacher. Jesse Jackson is a preacher. Reverend Sharpton's a preacher. In a way, Malcolm was a preacher. But we never talked about Black business people being leaders. In any other group in America, who are the leaders?
Business
leaders.
In the Cuban American community in Miami, who are the leaders? It was the Iranian leader. You guys in LA, you know how much Iranians buy much property in LA and how they co-invest. Okay. You name it, Jews all over. I mean, for history, people are shocked at how few Jews are in the United States. 6 million, 7 million? Ain't many. But they coalesced around money. They coalesced in creating, relationships, to bring wealth. And what did that do? That gave them power. Now, you guys, you're younger. You got to ask the question, why did we ever do that?
Well, and we have tried. You got Tulsa, right? You got
there's that in the book. Yeah.
There are countless examples of Black excellence and Black wealth being burned to the ground, being razed to the ground, which is I think somewhat interesting about the world right now with Bitcoin, blockchain, some distributed systems that are a little harder to touch, but we'll see where that goes. But it is a good question. Like, why haven't we done it? And how do we do it? And how do we do it now? How do we get there?
What you guys are doing is important. I mean, to me, you asked me the question earlier on, what keeps me going in the morning? When I get up and meet guys like you and women, and people, I think it goes both ways. I think even within our race, that we have people who are thinking differently. They're thinking big. They're thinking about coalescing in a way we've never coalesced before. We've never had, and in my book, with the 10 things I think Black people got to do differently, I said, we got to stop crabs in the barrel. But that also has been institutionalized and codified within our society. That is not a happenstance. So we got to get out of that if we're going to be able to coalesce. And the other is that I think, Keith, I'll pick on you. And I said this, last year, Juneteenth, a big speech. I said, look, if we're going to solve this problem, it's going to be white people going to be solving the problem. We can identify the problem. We can do better at what we do to add to the solution to the problem. But at the end, it's got to be white people. And so when I saw, the people coming together, behind the killings in Florida, and these young kids of all races coming and holding hands, and when Black Lives Matter, you see people, going out there holding hands and candles, who are white, Black, young, gays, coming together. To me, that represents where, as a nation, we might survive. So
around the world too, people are rallying around.
Can we click on this? I think it's important, specifically for the audience or anybody who ever listens to this, on the sentiment, and you can pick on me all day long. I accept the challenge of white people solving the problem. How do you see that happening?
I think, it'd be very interesting. I mean, I think for me, and I say this, and I say it to my white friends, both within the company and outside, it is in your best interest to solve it. And if you only think in terms of the next quarter or the next year, you're going to miss something. And you're seeing it happen, and you guys are part of it, putting in front of people the truth of what's happening in 2021. And if we don't get this together, there have been great nations that suffered. I'm not saying anything will happen to this nation. It just won't be the same. It won't be the same. It won't be as powerful. It won't be just a fun place to live in. It's going to be, when you see people, killing Asians because, they say it had nothing to do with being Asian. That's not true. You're seeing Asians being attacked every day because somebody said, the Chinese flu. You know what I mean? So it's not going to be a fun place for my daughter to come up and bring her kids up. So I think it's in the best interest of the leaders of our country to see. You can look at next quarter's profitability. You can look at your shares. They're going to go up. There's trillions of dollars are going to be invested. Companies, we're going to rebound. The GNP is going to grow by 2 or 3%. That's huge, But if we don't get it together and really have a positive impact on low-income people, irrespective of race or low-income communities, the chickens come home to roost. And that's what I tell them. It is not, it's a short-term game, but you got to look beyond that. And that's why you got to make the investment now in the right things with the right people and approach it in the same systematic way you look at a business decision. It's the same approach. And they're not different rules for trying to turn around a dying ship or a dying company. It's the same approach with the same people. And then if you get it together, everybody's going to win.
There is a lot of things that in my mind that I want to tie together vocally, and I hope I do a good job in a concise way. And if I don't, I'm going to edit it so it comes out cleanly. So we had a guest on, a professor who's writing a book about the generational trauma that white people face. Now, he's doing it from a social justice perspective, and we had a really good conversation about it. And this is one of those areas that generationally, in historically American white families, there is a perspective of zero sum. If Black people rise up, white people lose, and it's going to be consequential. You fast forward to 2021, and we are actually the white people, as defined in American census, are declining in population for the first time in the history of this country. And by 2025, expected to decrease by a couple of percentage points. Every other group in this country defined by census is on the increase. Not huge, but marginally. Now, Mike Pence came out and said, as a vice president, in one of his offshoot meetings, something to the effect that we need people to have more babies, right? What he's saying is we need white people to have more babies if we're going to have long-term GDP growth.
Mhm.
And what I love that you say in your book is that, because I'm tying this together, I would say that's not necessary when you have 30, 40, to be over 50% of the population. When you focus your energy on their economic growth, because this is not a zero-sum game. This is a rising tide floats all boats. There's plenty of opportunity out there for everybody. If you focus your energy on creating equity as the power dynamic, not just bringing in more white babies, you will have more gross domestic product growth over time than you would if you just produce more kids. And I love that point in your book. Yeah, obviously all the other things like our interview weren't in the book, but just that idea, like putting that numerical reference around the wealth gap and how much of this population is in that lower tier of wealth. And if we focus on it, like we're all going to get better. We're all going to be better.
Let me give you a very quick and simple answer, and deal with numbers. And it might vary. You guys keep score, but in 2040, 43, 44, there are two numbers that jump out at us. Now, there might be reasons why things don't happen this way, but pretty much is going towards, by that time, the majority of the people in America will be not white.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of the people by 2043 will be non-white. Okay.
For the first time in American history.
First time. What else is? I'm a professor out there. What else is going to happen around 2043 unless we do something different? We will not have any money in Social Security.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Think about it. Think about it. So I say, people, and I write this, I've been writing for 10 or 15 years. We got to get our act together now to take the people of color to be more involved, more positively, more impactfully involved in the free enterprise system. If we believe in the free enterprise system, so we will have people producing wealth to support the Social Security. We cannot build that up if the vast majority of the people of color are receiving social net worth, not net worth, but a safety net donation.
Social benefit.
It doesn't work, people. It doesn't work in a free enterprise system. We have to create more wealth. And what I've argued is we have to create wealth together. You'll see in the book, I talk about strategic partnerships. I think we have to do a better job within our community to be better players in this, but we will never win if we do it by ourselves. We have to have strategic partners who are women. We have to have strategic partners who are Black and strategic partners who are white. And I even say in the book, we have to have strategic partners in the Black diaspora, where you have people in the Caribbean who want to still work with people and invest with and work with people of color. We have billionaires in Africa who want to work with Black billionaires in America. We got a window. We got in about 20 or 35 years. We got to get all this stuff working or we're going to be in bad shape. And even I said that in South Africa. I've lectured in South Africa. And when I went to my executive program at Harvard, I had people from South Africa, from the big corporations. And that was right around when Mandela was getting out. And they were leaving the country. They were going to Australia. They were going anywhere out of fear. I said, don't leave. Stay. Let your sons and daughters be a part of the new wave and create businesses together. And some did. Some left. They went to Australia. But I mean, it's the same thing.
There's a huge cultural component to this. Like you mentioned Iranians and Jews, and on a macro level, it seems like this is very much a conversation of addressing the scarcity mindset that I want to say capitalism seems to perpetuate. At least that's how I've interpreted it.
Yep.
Like, if I'm going to get mine, then that means you can't get yours. But now I see, I think what I understand now, and I think people that have money understand this, is that money is everywhere. In fact, this country prints it almost all the time. Like, it is abundant, and it's not that hard to get. But we got to switch people from that scarcity mindset, or try to switch people from scarcity to abundance, so that they'll be willing to work together. Because I think there's a lot of Keith, we had a previous guest that said it. There's a lot of distrust and a lot of fear about coming to the table, even in the diaspora, right? Like, especially in the diaspora or in the community, there's fear of coming together. I'm gonna lose mine. You're gonna do me wrong.
They ain't got nothing. So let's put all this in perspective. You know how many billionaires we got in my book. I talk about we can't have 2 or 3 billionaires. We got to have 40 or 50 billionaires. When you got 40 or 60 billionaires, then we can spread the wealth and we can create more wealth. And then if they want to fight, that would be stupid, because in these other communities, it's the Jewish billionaires investing other Jewish billionaires' businesses. So even there, I've seen examples where they will invest in each other's businesses and everybody wins, And then, I was talking about exclusive things in Chicago. Chicago sometimes can be a very segregated city, but
lived there for 10 years.
So the University Club, I integrated the University Club. They didn't have any black people in the University Club. Chicago Club. Then the Jews have their clubs. Okay, the Standard Club, the Jewish Club. So one of my guys from my high school, I said, "Why don't you have more blacks in the Standard Club?" I'm saying, I'm there as a guest. Why don't you have more blacks? He said, "We ain't got no problem with blacks. The only thing we say, if you're going to be a member of the Standard Club, something like that, you got to give 30% of your profits to Jewish, nonprofits." I can't argue with that. I can't.
It's a great idea. It is a fantastic idea.
I can't argue with that.
I think you gave another answer to it right there, Jim. Bezos, Zuckerberg, Gates, Buffett, building investment engines to invest in black communities, to invest in minority communities, and to invest into minority business, like accelerators that help build and teach. And actually, I'm aware of one that's happening right now with Microsoft. For the first time ever, they're building a black partner ecosystem. Because, like, I look at my white counterparts who've gone and started these businesses and technology firms. There is a large knowledge gap, and there is a large opportunity gap. And those people that I just named could wipe that out, like, hands down. They could just wipe that out.
Mm-hmm. And let me give you a good example of, if you see, because we're all dealing with similar kind of people who are challenging why should be part of the free enterprise system, why should we be part of the capitalistic system? They ain't doing nothing for us. There's a lot of truth there. Some of that and work for us, and part of it is our fault, but other things. Let me give you a good example about big wealth. You mentioned those guys. I happen to be on a board for years with Warren Buffett. Okay. Warren Buffett talked to us about another trustee who's going to start his own company, and that we should put money as individuals on the board, not the college, into his company that he was starting. The other guy's name was Bob Noyce. He started Intel. So this little school in Iowa has a multi-billion-dollar endowment. I know what the endowments are, all of historically black colleges. I've been trying to build them up, but they ain't got multi-billions. So the power of that one guy, the brilliance of that one guy. Now you take Warren Buffett And he has a nephew, and I just came across this last week in Business Week. He has been behind the scenes, very quiet, wonderful young guy. This is a nephew. He created a company where all the nieces and the nephews and the grandsons of the super rich around the world are coming together to invest in great things in developing countries. I'll send you an article. I'm so proud. I mean, so here's this quiet guy, and see Dangote, his kids are part of this, and people like that are. So you have this mega connection with the offsprings of these billionaires coming together to do something great. So we gotta, even with our own community, have to think beyond the next quarter. We got to think where we want to go. Where you guys are my leaders. So where are you going to take your generation, and think big on how you're going to get there.
And those endowments, I just wanted to speak on that real quick. Being the president of the board of the Boys and Girls Club in Venice, those endowments make all the difference.
All the difference.
One of our sister organizations in LA that I won't name has an amazing endowment. It is multi-million-dollar actually. And what they're able to do off of the interest from that, what they were able to provide to their community and to the children that they serve, is amazing. And it's so those universities, like, you think about the ripple effect of what that university is able to do and what others are not able to do, because they're just trying to keep the doors open. They're trying to keep the lights on. They're fighting every day to get just enough to make it by. They're not able to focus on excelling and exceeding and going into new areas. Those endowments make a huge, huge difference.
So where do you think you see that? Because I was on this board. I went on this board at 29, so I just got off about a few years ago. Where do you think that money goes when you start thinking about historically Black colleges? If you're going to say, okay, where does it go? Okay, where does it go? One, it goes into buildings, obviously. So you can build state-of-the-art science business, state-of-the-art any kind of business, theatrical business. It goes to brick and mortar. But the most important place where it goes is in professors. Think about it.
Yep.
If you got a lot of money, you can buy a lot of good professors.
Mm-hmm.
If you ain't got a lot of money, you can't do that. And so I've always said, look, I think a lot of people, and I'm not going to name names and stuff like that, we put more people on boards on historically Black college. They ain't giving no money and they ain't raising no money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why should they be on the board? I mean, you have one responsibility to be on the board is you have a fiduciary responsibility.
Fiduciary, yeah, that's what
you're
there
here to
for.
build it. And we got to do surveys of who's on what board and what are they doing. I'm on Kellogg's board. The dean said, okay, each one of you got to give us, it's pretty some money just to be on the board.
Just to sit here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we got to think differently about all this stuff, because the stakes are too high. And we can pour money into historically Black colleges, but they're not ready to take it and do something with it. Say, like you could for the Boys Club and Boy and Girls Club of Venice, it's just going to a hole. I'm not saying it should. The other thing I would say, and you got me guys going on this.
I love it. Keep going.
You got me going. And I'm just making it rhetorical because I don't want to get in trouble. But what percentage?
Diplomatic. He's diplomatic.
Okay, I'm diplomatic. But honest. What percentage of you looked at all the historically Black colleges, all of them, and you ask yourself, because you guys are smart, you're Microsoft kind of people, what percentage of those students are in Pell Grants? That will tell you the story about the state and the vulnerability of historically Black colleges.
I'm guessing it's high.
It's very, very high.
I was going to say 60, but now I want to say 80.
It's closer to 70%. So you got vast majority of these kids are there on a Pell Grant. Take away the Pell Grants, people. You do away with the Pell Grants allocations every year from the federal government. We don't have historically black colleges. I got you guys thinking.
Yeah. So I think this goes back. This goes back to that question, and I want to dig in on it. Like, why do you think that is? Like, why does that? I know we went back and we're the church leaders and all of that, but why do you think that shift hasn't been made?
I think that's a great question, Keith. I think it always comes to leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so where's the leadership? It always comes to relationships because, you know, if you go to Yale, Harvard, who's on that board? You know, it's a relationship. It might be somebody from Goldman Sachs who knows a good friend at JP Morgan Chase, and, you know, they both went and they're in the same class. So they come on the same board. They write big checks. So you got to know who are the checks. I think the other thing, which is probably going to get me in trouble, is I think there's a mindset that the government is going to be the panacea for everything, especially the black community. So if that's your mindset, we got the federal government and they're going to always bail us out. And it's not just for higher education. I think there's a mindset that goes throughout. And what we're you know, using the illustration you use and I use, there's this other scenario where it is not the government. You know, when the Jews say if you want to be a part of the Standard Club, you got to give 30% of your profitability to Jewish organizations. That's a different mindset that I think historically been embedded in our minds, that the federal government, and I think right now, very critical period now that we have a disproportionate number of people who are progressive, of color, who are now going into this administration. If most of the focus is on giving money away to dealing with all this money, say 100% of the money is going to be directed at dealing with historic problems that are besetting our community, that's not a wise decision. I'm saying that we should have not a disproportionate, but a much greater number of initiatives that are economically driven, so that we are in a position to create more wealth, as opposed to taking money to put the finger in the dike of all these different problems.
Do you think, in a way, tying both of these things together, it's self-perpetuating? If we're not investing in our own community, then we can't rely on those that succeed. So we rely on the government because they're the only ones that are going to help us out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If that's not a mindset, we don't have a mindset within our communities, you know, where you guys, I mean, and this is happening, I think, for better or worse, you know, there are many people like you who are at Microsoft and Microsoft kind of companies, you know, Amazon, you know, BCG, McKinsey, who are saying, I don't know if I want to spend 9, 10 years chasing the golden ring, you know, so I'm going to put in my time. I'm going to learn what I got to learn. I'm going to establish relationships that will help me when I start my own business, but I ain't going to be here for 20 years looking for the golden Rolex watch. And I think that is shifting. I don't know if corporate Americas can deal with it the way it's happening, but it's happening. They really don't. I mean, they don't know what you're going to do. And so, you know, and I'll pick on, you know, the company I know well. You take IBM. You take John Thompson. I've known John Thompson when he was at IBM and before he went to Microsoft. And so he's chairman of your board. So he paid the price of bleeding blue. He was a high-ranking person, you know, at IBM, and he paid the price. And God bless the fact that he did. And I can name a lot of my friends who did that, and thank God they're in the C-suite to make a big difference in terms of how monies are allocated. I think we got to have those people too. We got to have people who are going to stay the course and say, because you got to have people at the table in the big room to say, yeah, you know, it's like we're sitting at JP Morgan Chase. Jamie's making the decisions, but he's got Black people who are very important, who are making decisions and steering the decisions and maybe increasing the goals. And that's very important. But we're going to get a lot of people like you guys out here. They're going to leave. But when you leave, we got to have a place where you can land and you can grow great wealth. Great wealth. And I think
there's also, and this story just keeps coming to my mind when you talk about the black-white dynamic in the country and what continues to perpetuate that from an adversarial standpoint when black athletes or musicians or businessmen I think about LeBron and what he's done in Akron and creating, a public school that is tuition free for all the students. And it's like, it's a great, he's been criticized by, people in the media, black and white, right? Stay in your lane. You're just an athlete. Why are you getting involved? Why are you doing this stuff? And, that bleeds out. And you don't hear that. Like if Kevin Love started a school, people would be like, "Oh, good for him. He's helping black people," right? Like,
if JJ Watt helps a community, it's like, oh yeah, he's a good American.
Raise your GoFundMe, man. Raise your GoFundMe, right? So it's. I mean, to your point, and this kind of ties back to, white people are a key piece to the change. Like, stop that shit.
Well, I think the other thing you got, it gets back to what Rodney was saying, going back to Tulsa. Is there a certain amount of fear when you have people, and let's be honest here, when you have smart, brilliant people, in many ways LeBron is. He's a brilliant player because of the way he takes care of his body. He's brilliant in the way he makes people come together. He is a brilliant mind. I've been watching LeBron since his 8th grade when they won the national championship.
Didn't he pay for his buddies to go to college and get their business degrees? And so that like they're his team, like that are managing his contracts and his businesses.
Think about it. That's why he doesn't talk to Phil Jackson today, because Phil Jackson, said, you got this posse. It's sort of like
right. I remember that.
Remember that? Now, see that's once again characterizing LeBron with some of these other guys who did have a posse, who did go bankrupt. Okay, that did go bankrupt. But LeBron's different, and that's why many of us love LeBron. That's why many of us love Jay-Z, because we're thinking they're thinking differently. That's why I love John, not because he's an entertainer. He's a philanthropist. He's a John Legend. And he cares about all the right things, and he's putting his money where it makes sense. That can be very scary. Now, what I'm saying to you, Keith, I'll put it on you again, because you're the only white guy.
I love it. Yeah. Hey, I'm good at it. I'm good with it.
And the Keiths around the country have to go back to where we started this conversation. It is not it's not a zero game loss.
Yeah.
It is, if we can get with LeBron and LeBron can get with Bezos' ex-wife and they can invest in this, that, and the other, everybody wins. Everybody wins. So it's a different.
I'll add a real quick tangible example to that. So living in South Bay, California, we were just living in Manhattan Beach and we moved out to Redondo. I will tell you this. Some of like the houses in Manhattan Beach are amazing. Like they fit the mold of my dream house, right on the beach, off the boardwalk, the promenade, beautiful homes. I will never buy a home in Manhattan Beach. It was microaggressions from day one to day last of like, oh, you live here? Oh, how did you buy that house? Like all of the little, like it, just these little microchips of like, you're able to live in this neighborhood because we didn't sign off on that, and it just enough to let me know that I got to watch myself, and whether or not it was real or imagined, it was here, and I think that exists in so many communities. Like I know the history, so I am not flaunting. I didn't wear a hoodie in that neighborhood ever, like not ever. And all I wear right now in COVID is hoodies, because it's like, it's all I wear. But not in that neighborhood, I wouldn't do it because I didn't feel safe. And it's like, like if I accumulate too much, who's gonna take it from me? Like, I'm just waiting, like, because I know the stories. Who's gonna take it from me?
Well, I think the other question I pose to both you guys, and I think about this often. I shake my head when I think about the many, many poor white families in this community, in this country, who don't even realize what's happening to them or who's doing it to them. And they then side with the people who are making their lives worse and just dealing with race as back to what you guys keep saying is a zero game. And once again, I don't know how. I will keep trying, but somebody's got to educate these people. We're all in this boat together. And if you, especially low income people and low income people, it don't matter whether you're white or black or green, you're low income. And when COVID hits you, it's hitting you just like, it's hitting a lot of people who are low income whites just as bad as it's happening black. But if they keep thinking it's happening to them because of black people, once again, we're all losing.
I just had to pull this up because you reminded me of a Lyndon Baines Johnson quote.
I know what
this explains that sentiment. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. He'll give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you. LBJ nailed that. Like that's exactly what's happening.
I use it all the time.
We brought up Tulsa. I think there were over 200 similar incidents, obviously Tulsa being the largest, across the country at that time. So I know we talk about Tulsa a lot, and I just want to, more for the production, want to call that out. Like, it's not just one thing. It's not just one time. It happened all the time around the country. So the question that I have when we talk about changing the mindset of investing into the communities and going away from government spending, how do you feel about reparations?
Depends how it's defined. I mean, I think, to be honest, if we do it where you define it into, X number of black people, therefore we should get X number of dollars, I don't think it's going to fly. And I would question, is that the best way to maximize the money that is owed us? I would prefer if we did all our great analysis of what that figure is, and maybe next year, working, if we can get the right people thinking in the right way, to have a kind of Marshall Plan, which is of size, if you add all that money up, to really have a big vision on how we're going to take what is owed us, reinvest it into black and low income areas to have the greatest impact. I think politically, and it still would be a stretch if we could do it, but I think at least we got to have that mindset. Now, I didn't know this until I saw it on 60 Minutes, is that there is, in Evanston, Illinois, which Chicago, that there was a city councilwoman who got it passed. It's the only city where they're going to have reparations. They did their calculation, and everybody who was deemed necessary is going to get a check in Evanston, Illinois. I always thought that would never happen, but it happened in Evanston, Illinois. So it got me thinking, I don't know where that model comes from, but there is, at least we got a model in Evanston, Illinois. They did the right research. They have identified the people, and they're going to get a check from the city. That's
the original model. I mean, the U.S. government did approve reparations, and then that lovely president, that peach of a president from the South, went and sliced it
after Lincoln was assassinated.
What about? Well, look at that.
Wonder why he was assassinated.
No, we had the Freeman Bank. I mean, when you start thinking about the banks that were created, that were supposed to be set up for black people to grow economically, they were put in the hands of people who didn't have our best interests. They got millions of dollars in the bank, and then within a relatively short period of time, they were bankrupt.
I mean, Keith, you had brought this up earlier. We had a Block West, one of our previous guests had mentioned. He's like, why is there a church on every corner in the hood? He's like, why don't we have banks? Why don't we have schools? Like, and I think to your point, expanding on like that plan, like education, financial literacy. Like, it's not just financial literacy. It's just like, I mean, when I think about the basics that even I have learned from my white friend Keith, that just like nobody in my family knew, it's mind-boggling, and how simple, like some of the like just basic shit that will just propel you in life that just like nobody in my family knew. It's not because my family is not intelligent; it's just they didn't know. And so I think that focus on not just 2 + 2 is 4 education, but like here's how this shit works.
That's the only reason I wrote the book. That's the only reason I wrote the book. To be between,
you give some good rules. You give some good,
to say here's what I know. Here's what I learned. I'm just passing it on to you guys. You know, because I learned this, and if I take it to me to the grave, what good did that do? And I tell my other friends to write books. I mean, we got to share what we've learned. But I'll get you another question that I'm going to put it back to you guys, and I want you to think about it. You mentioned you got a church on every corner. We have 3 liquor stores on the same block, and we got hustlers on the corner selling dope to our kids. So when everybody started talking about, you know, different Black communities and how they're going down and deterioration, and therefore we're going to save it by gentrifying it, how many people are really dealing with drug trafficking and drug addiction in a way that will have a major impact on those communities in our country?
And as my dad told me, the rough neighborhood he grew up in, Cincy, the police never showed up. Like they did not show up. There were drugs, and he said nobody in my neighborhood could afford a yacht or a plane to bring these drugs into this country. They were brought here by somebody, and they weren't brought here by anybody in the community.
Well, if you want to take it to the 21st century, marijuana put so many Black people in jail for extended periods of time on an individual basis. Now we have a new industry that is $1 billion industry that Blacks and Browns are not a part of. But doesn't this go back to what Rodney was saying about his house? He says, okay, wealth transfer. So who's investing in it? Who's going to make a lot of money? People who have cash. Yeah. Because you got to have cash in this new industry because you can't bank it. Okay, so
federal crime still.
Make the money. Make the money. You got to spend millions of dollars just on security protecting your cash, so it doesn't go on the ground. So I mean, it always, you got to analyze. What I'm trying to get people to do is think about it, not in a very vicious way, but you got to be realistic about the power of money. And you can trace almost anything to the power and the large sums of money and capital. I'm just saying we got to create more capital to just be in the game. Because if you can't,
I think you make a really good point, because I've always heard growing up cash is king, and like nobody could really explain it to me. Granted, there's I can negotiate with you on the 1-to-1 level if I'm paying cash versus, you know, credit card or whatever. But on a much larger level, the ability, like I could have a great salary, I could make $200,000-$300,000 a year, but if I don't have any cash, I can't invest in anything. I can't put that money that I'm making to work for me. And that's the thing. That's what the Black community has been blocked out of.
Well, I had a very dear friend who was very prominent. I won't use his name. He's dead now. And he started making a lot of money at a big law firm in D.C. And he told me, Larry, you know, I made so much money this year. I said, it's not how much money you pay to the federal government. It's what is your net worth every year, how it increases. So you keep score not so much on the money you pay to the feds, but more importantly on what was your net worth this year as opposed to next year.
Thank you for your time. Yeah. So man, so there's something I just want to say. I know there's a question around it, but I just want your spirit. You have a I'm going to be presumptuous again. An eternally optimistic spirit about you that is encouraging and uplifting. And
you should read the last page of his book. Read the last page of his book.
Sometimes you don't see from people who have been in the arena that you're in for such a long time, because it's easy to get mad and bitter and angry. And I'm sure there are pieces of that for you, but I don't feel it. I feel hope. So I appreciate you.
Well, you give me hope. You guys give me hope. You guys are the secret sauce. So keep doing what you're doing. And if I can help you on an individual basis or on a collective basis, your business, your podcast, you know, I don't have a lot of time, but I'll make sure I give you time. Okay.
Well, thank you. We have one final question. And to extend upon the initial question that Keith asked, as our mission is to anchor humanity and compassionate conversation, want to know what does compassion mean to you?
Compassion there's a difference between compassion and passion. Passion is one thing that you've got to have sense of purpose in your life. And that should be a passion that gets you up in the morning to keep you going, to really answer the last question you asked. Compassion is to be able to look at people through their eyes and to know what they've been through and what they're thinking and what they're suffering, and not make judgment, but to hear them, feel for them, and hope that you can help them, make their lives better.